I started toying around with the idea of auditioning for a drum corps. I had absolutely no experience with a brass instrument. What was I thinking? Now's the part of the story where I tell you how I taught myself how to play euphonium in 6 weeks so that I could audition for the Phantom Regiment. As I was laying in bed recovering from my illness,
my body is broken.
I realized that the auditions for the upcoming 2010 drum corps season were on the horizon. Roughly 6 weeks, I started toying around with the idea of auditioning for a drum corps.
You sure about that?
What would I need to do to prepare myself? I wasn't sure which one, so I went into research mode. The most convenient corps for me to audition for was the Crossmen, the corps that I was extremely passionate about and I wanted to audition for was, of course, the Phantom Regiment. Well, I played saxophone all through high school. I had absolutely no experience with a brass instrument. I never once played a brass horn, not one time in my life.
Okay.
There was a very giant problem in between my aspiration and where I was today.
No shit.
So I did what any rational person in my position would do. I drove down to my local music store and I rented a euphonium. A concert euphonium, by the way, not a marching one.
What an idiot!
And a few euphonium books as well. Now, why euphonium? Well, I knew if I was going to have a chance at auditioning for a drum corps, the soprano and the mellophone were going to be too technical. And the contra looked a little too unwieldy for me. So I settled on the euphonium. It was at this time when I had a conversation with my parents and I clued them in on my newfound aspiration. Of course, like the great parents they are, they supported me and they encouraged me. So the next steps were clear. I signed up for an audition for both the Crossmen and the Phantom Regiment. I just needed to learn how to play the euphonium. I knew I had very limited time in between then and when my audition was, so I immediately started looking at the audition packets, understanding the musical selections that I needed to learn, and I started working backwards. The first couple of days that I had my euphonium, I didn't even attempt to play a single note. What I did was dedicate my time to solely learning the mechanics of the horn, how to read bass clef, and start memorizing finger positions of the different notes. Now, I need to start playing the horn, which led me to my second problem, which was I lived in an apartment and the euphonium is really freaking loud. Fortunately for me, I attended UNT. And what did UNT have? They had a building dedicated to music rooms, which led me to my third problem. Those music rooms were reserved exclusively for music students. I was not a music student, unfortunately. So what did I do? Well, I waited outside the door for somebody to leave and I snuck in. It was the only place that I could really practice playing the instrument. And yes, I had people peeking inside the windows, trying to figure out what the hell was going on inside my practice room. But nonetheless, I effectively, in just a few weeks, learned how to play euphonium somewhat. Now, enter problem number 4. My Crossmen audition was just in a couple weeks' time. They required you to bring your own horn. I, of course, didn't have a marching horn at the time, so what did I do? I contacted my old band director, told him the situation, and he, of course, graciously, like an amazing instructor that he was, let me borrow a marching baritone from my old high school, and I learned how to play that, all while sneaking into practice rooms when I shouldn't have. Don't tell Paul Rennick. And so came time for me to drive to Forney, Texas, where they were holding the auditions for the Crossmen. How did it go? Well, it went pretty well, actually. All things considered, I ended up getting a call back from the Crossmen, but as I stated earlier, that wasn't my true goal. My true goal was the Phantom Regiment, which was the following week. So just to recap, 6 weeks ago, the first time I ever touched a brass instrument, the first time I ever played the Euphonium, I'm now flying up to Rockford, Illinois to perform an audition against some of the best players in the nation at my age. What was I thinking? To contextualize the situation even more, much like my college studies, I was cramming what I needed to know at the very last moments. Literally, on the plane to Rockford, I was fingering the music for my audition materials on the armrest of the airplane. Completely out of my league, completely out of my depth. I walked into that high school. But do you want to know what? The phrase I kept reciting in my mind leading up to this audition was, why run away from fear when you can run towards it? This was my mantra that got me on that plane, that pushed me through to this audition. And it was the mantra that I recited in my mind going into that audition room and that audition camp. I was also committed to embodying a drum corps veteran. What were my advantages up to this point? I had 4 years of marching band experience. Though it was the wrong instrument, that didn't count for nothing. I was also a huge fan of drum corps. I analyzed how drum corps players marched, how they looked, rehearsal footage of how they carried themselves, and I just embodied the soul and the look and the confidence of somebody who had marched drum corps before, because that's all I really had. Now, if you weren't aware, drum corps auditions are broken up into basically two components. You have a marching audition that judges your form and your technique, and then you have the musical audition. In the Phantom Regiment 2010 audition, we had to perform 3 different etudes. I was feeling pretty good about my preparation. I could play 2 of the etudes pretty proficiently, and 1 I could play proficiently halfway through. I only learned half of the excerpt that I needed to know for the audition.
Hey! You idiot!
I don't know how or why this happened, but when I was standing in front of the staff, about to perform my audition material, he asked me to play up to a certain measure. I told him, hey, listen, I've only been playing Euphonium for 6 weeks. I only know this music up to this measure, which was roughly half of what he was expecting. His next words were,
Good luck.
So I proceeded to perform the etude. Again, I performed it pretty proficiently, up to about 50%. In my previous video, I mentioned I was pretty good at sight reading. Well, I was really good at sight reading saxophone. I was not good at sight reading on the euphonium. But what did I do? I tried my best. I'm pretty sure I sounded like a dying duck. I completely butchered it. But what did I do? I tried. I got through the end of the excerpt. I snapped my horn down like a professional drum corps player. I went at rest and I looked at him. We smiled at each other and he said, thanks. And I walked out of the room. I knew I blew it. How could I have only learned half of the excerpt of one of the 3 etudes I was supposed to prepare? How could this have happened? I gave myself some grace. Walking out of that room, I knew it was over. I proceeded to allow myself to enjoy the rest of that musical camp. I had absolutely no expectations that I would continue on. I patted myself on the back for even being there in the first place. I was so close, and yet I was so far. It was a valiant effort, but I was finished. Well, on Sunday, they gathered up all the attendees of the camp into the gym. None other than J.D. Shaw himself was standing before us, and he asked that if your name was called, please exit the gym. And so he started reading names, one after another, after another, after another, until he stopped naming names. My name was never called. He then proceeded to tell us that if your name wasn't called, you made the cut.
Yeah, bitch!
I couldn't believe my ears. How could I have pulled off the most impossible feat of my musical career? What I would consider completely botching the audition and still make the cut? How was this possible? Equally in disbelief while simultaneously over the moon. To this day, I think back on that experience and I'm honestly still in disbelief. I couldn't believe that I actually pulled it off. How could I have done this? You know, they ask, what's the most important part of success? Skill, luck, or hard work? When I ask myself that question in relation to this experience, my answer is the same as it is in most things when it comes to achieving success, and that is, you need all three. As I stated in my previous video, there is nothing special about me, my experience leading up to that audition, but I worked really hard to prepare in that short period of time. I leveraged my marching experience, my experience in watching drum corps footage, and the attitude I took walking into that weekend, that audition room, and I think I was lucky. The person on the other side of that audition table, I think he really took the spirit of what Phantom Regiment was. The Phantom Regiment is never looking for top-tier talent. They're looking for people who have passion, who have a drive and a desire to learn. And I think that all coalesced into me making the cut and leading to my experience with the Phantom Regiment. What do you do with this? Well, ask yourself, how can you use your unique talents, your unique experiences, your skills, whether they be natural or learned, and apply hard work to manufacture your own luck? How can you do that? I hope this story served as some inspiration in how you can apply some of these lessons to your life.